Nobody in Hargrove would have guessed that the quiet man on the corner of Sycamore Road was anything more than what he appeared to be. He walked slowly, the way older men walk when they have stopped competing with time. His cardigan was the color of dried moss. His khaki pants faded at the knees from years of kneeling in the garden. He carried a small canvas bag over one arm and moved through the morning air with the kind of stillness that only comes from a life fully lived. His name was Solomon Greer. He was 64 years old, and on this particular Tuesday morning, all he wanted was a box of rooting powder from the hardware store 2 blocks away. His rose bushes had been struggling, the red climbers along the back fence needed attention, and the yellow tea roses near Marion's old reading chair on the porch had started to droop at the stems. Marion had planted those roses the year before she got sick. Solomon tended them like promises. He stepped off the curb at the Sycamore Road intersection without rushing, without looking at his phone, without talking to anyone. His dark eyes moved the way they always moved, cataloging, measuring, noting the delivery van idling too long outside the dry cleaner, the kid on the bicycle cutting through the pharmacy parking lot, the woman in the yellow housecoat watching from her second-floor window. It was an involuntary habit, the ghost of 30 years of federal work that refused to fully sleep. He had been a federal appellate judge for nearly 2 decades. Before that, a professor of federal appellate procedure at Georgetown Law. Before that, a law clerk, a public defender, a civil rights attorney in the years when that work could get your car windows broken or your house watched. He had written opinions that changed the legal landscape of 5 states. He had presided over cases that set precedents still cited in law school classrooms today. He had argued before the Supreme Court 3 times. He had also buried his wife, and after that, there was nothing left in him that needed to be seen or recognized or celebrated. He had packed his robes, his plaques, his framed opinions, and his ceremonial gavel into 3 cardboard boxes. He had put those boxes in the hall closet. He had planted yellow tea roses in his backyard, and he had become to all outward appearances an unremarkable old man on Sycamore Road. His neighbors knew him as Solomon. Some called him the Professor. A boy named Deshaun, 17 years old and furiously intelligent, came by every Wednesday to play chess on the front porch and argue about everything from constitutional law to basketball. Solomon liked Deshaun. He reminded him of himself at that age. Angry, brilliant, trying to make sense of a world that had not yet made sense of him. But on this Tuesday morning, Solomon was not thinking about chess or roses or the complexities of federal jurisprudence. He was thinking about rooting powder and whether the hardware store would have the organic kind that Marion had always preferred. He did not see the cruiser, not at first. He had parked the old Buick on the street, a 2009 sedan, the color of faded pewter, with a small dent above the rear wheel well that he kept meaning to fix. He had walked the 2 blocks because the morning was clear, and his knees were cooperating, and he saw no reason to drive 2 blocks when his legs still worked. The Buick sat at the curb where he had left it. Registration current. Sticker renewed 6 weeks prior, everything in order. He did not know that a man in a police cruiser 1 block over was looking at that car. Travis Culp had been parked on the corner of Sycamore and 4th for 11 minutes. He was not responding to a call. He was not observing a disturbance. He was running license plates. He was 37 years old, built like a man who lifted weights for the wrong reasons with a jaw that sat too tight and eyes that moved with the cold measuring look of someone who had learned early that the world was divided into 2 kinds of people, the ones who held the authority, and the ones who needed to be reminded they didn't. He had 9 years on the force, He had 11 misconduct complaints in his personnel file. All 11 had been dismissed. He knew they had been dismissed. He also knew why. Lieutenant Warren Scheck ran the West Side Division with the kind of management philosophy that was never written down anywhere but was understood completely by everyone who worked under him. Numbers mattered, arrests mattered, stops mattered. Outcomes were secondary to statistics. The informal monthly quota was 12 quality stops. The word quality meant nothing specific and everything practical. It meant stops that resulted in something. An impound, a citation with teeth, an arrest that could be packaged and presented at the monthly briefing as evidence that the West Side Division was doing its job. Travis Culp was by Scheck's metric the best officer in the division. He averaged 14 stops a month. He was 3 stops away from sergeant. Everybody knew it, and today was the 28th of the month. He had 9 stops on the board. He needed 2 more before the cycle closed on Thursday. His rookie partner, Pete Dolan, sat in the passenger seat staring at his phone. Pete was 24 and had been out of the academy for 4 months. He was the kind of young man who had joined the force because he genuinely believed in what the job was supposed to be. He had not yet fully understood the distance between what the job was supposed to be and what it sometimes was. Culp ran the Buick's plate. The system returned clean. Current registration, no warrants, no flags. He stared at the result for a moment. Then he put the cruiser in drive. Pete looked up from his phone. "Where are we going?" Culp didn't answer. He pulled the cruiser around the corner and onto Sycamore Road, moving slow, the way cats move when they have already decided. Solomon was halfway back from the hardware store when he saw the lights. Red and blue. Flashing in the rearview mirror he kept on his canvas bag strap out of old habit. He stopped walking. He turned around. The cruiser had pulled up alongside the Buick and angled in half blocking the lane. Solomon felt something old and familiar settle into his chest. Not fear. He had stopped being afraid a long time ago. It was something more like clarity, the sharpening of attention that happens when a man who has spent his life reading situations recognizes one instantly. He walked back toward the Buick, slowly keeping his hands visible, keeping his pace unhurried. He did not reach into the bag. He did not reach into any pocket. Travis Culp stepped out of the cruiser before Solomon reached the car. "This your vehicle?" Solomon stopped. He looked at the cruiser. He looked at Culp. He looked at Pete Dolan, who had gotten out of the passenger side and was standing near the rear bumper with the slightly miserable expression of a man watching something he cannot stop. "Yes," Officer Solomon said. His voice was deep and unhurried, the kind of voice that came from 30 years of courtrooms and lecture halls. "Is there a problem?" Culp walked toward him. "Registration sticker looks expired." Solomon did not raise his voice. "I renewed my registration 6 weeks ago," he said. "The sticker is current. You're welcome to verify that with your system." "I already ran the plate," Culp said. "I'd like to see your license and registration." "Of course," Solomon said. He reached very slowly and very deliberately into the canvas bag and removed his wallet. He extended his driver's license in his open palm. Culp took it. He looked at it for longer than necessary. He walked back to the cruiser. He did not invite Solomon to get in out of the heat. He did not explain what he was doing. He let the silence sit there, thick and deliberate the way men like Culp used silence. As a small assertion of control, Pete stood near the rear bumper and did not make eye contact with Solomon. Solomon stood on the sidewalk with his canvas bag and waited. He had waited in longer silences than this. He was not in a hurry. Culp came back. He handed the license back. "You've been drinking this morning?" "No," Solomon said. "You seem a little unsteady." Solomon looked at him. He was standing perfectly still on a flat sidewalk on a clear morning with both feet planted evenly. "I am not unsteady," he said simply. "I have not consumed alcohol today." "Step over here," Culp said. "Why?" Culp moved closer. His voice dropped, not from courtesy, but from the particular menace that comes from not wanting a scene with witnesses. "I said step over here, sir. Do not make this difficult." An older woman named Mrs. Paulette Dawes had come out of her house 3 doors down and was standing on her porch with her arms crossed and her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She had lived on Sycamore Road for 31 years. She had seen this before. Solomon did not step over. "Officer," he said, "I asked you a question. What is the basis for this stop?" Culp's jaw tightened. "I observed an irregular registration sticker. My registration is current. You ran the plate. You know that." Culp stepped closer. "Sir, I am asking you one more time to step over here. I am going to need you to submit to a field sobriety evaluation." Solomon looked at him for a long moment. He looked at Pete, who had gone very still. He looked at Mrs. Dawes on the porch. He set the canvas bag down on the hood of the Buick. He took a slow step to the right onto the grass strip between the sidewalk and the curb. He said nothing. Culp came around to face him, arms out to the sides. Solomon extended both arms. His posture was immaculate. His face was a wall. "Follow my finger with your eyes." Solomon tracked Culp's finger without moving his head. Perfect, no nystagmus, no drift, no hesitation. "Walk this line." Solomon walked the line. 10 steps forward pivot, 10 steps back. Measured controlled level. Culp watched him. The corner of his mouth was working. He had not found what he came looking for. He was not ready to leave empty-handed. "I'm going to need you to submit to a breathalyzer." "I would be happy to," Solomon said. "Please administer the test." Culp looked at the cruiser. Then he looked back at Solomon. "The breathalyzer in my vehicle is currently out of service." Solomon said nothing. He simply waited. "I need you to come with me to the station." "I am not required to accompany you to the station without a lawful reason," Solomon said. He said it the way he used to say things in the courtroom. Not as an argument, as a statement of fact. Culp stepped forward until he was very close. "You are being uncooperative," he said quietly. "I am being precise," Solomon replied. That was when Culp reached out and took Solomon's arm. The grip was hard and pulling, designed to destabilize to force motion. Solomon did not move. He was a large man, even at 64. His frame had not entirely surrendered to age. Pete Dolan made a sound behind Culp, something between an intake of breath and a word that didn't fully form. Culp pulled harder. He said the word that men like him used when they needed to justify force before it happened. Stop resisting. Solomon had not resisted. He had not moved. He had done nothing except exist precisely and without apology on a public sidewalk in front of his own legally parked car. Pete Dolan stepped forward. He cuffed Solomon's wrists. His hands were not steady. He did not make eye contact. Solomon let it happen. He did not struggle. He did not argue. He did not ask for explanations that he knew were not coming. Mrs. Dawes on her porch had her phone out. She was not calling anyone. She was filming. Solomon was placed in the back of the cruiser. The door closed. The air was stale and hot. He looked straight ahead. In 30 years, on the federal bench, he had sent men to prison and freed innocent ones. He had read thousands of incident reports. He had heard thousands of police officers testify. He knew exactly what was going to be written in the report that Culp was already composing in his head. Defendant was uncooperative. Officer detected odor of alcohol. Defendant refused sobriety evaluation. Officer utilized minimal force to secure defendant for transport. He had read that report before. In different cities, different names, the same architecture. He sat in the hot backseat of Travis Culp's cruiser, and he was not afraid. He was not even angry. He was simply quietly, completely certain of what he was going to do. The Hargrove Police Department processed Solomon Greer at 10:47 in the morning. He was photographed, fingerprinted, and issued a county jumpsuit the color of old pumpkin. It was 2 sizes too large. He did not complain. He was walked to a holding cell by a desk officer named Frank Corley, a heavy-set man in his 50s with tired eyes and a wedding ring he had worn so long it had left a permanent groove in his skin. Corley had been at this desk for 20 years. He had seen everything the job had to offer. Or so he believed. He looked at Solomon as he was processing the intake paperwork. Most men in Solomon's situation looked one of 3 ways. Terrified, furious, or broken before they arrived, the kind of man who had been through this enough times that the machinery of it no longer surprised him. Solomon looked like none of those things. He stood at the booking desk with his hands folded in front of him and watched the room with the patient, calibrated attention of a man who was studying something. Not frightened, not agitated, measuring. Corley found himself hesitating over the keyboard. Something about the man was wrong. Not wrong in the way that set off alarm bells. Wrong in the way that certain things are wrong when they are out of their correct place. Like finding a museum piece in a junk drawer. But he processed the paperwork. He entered the charges. Resisting arrest. Obstruction of justice. Public intoxication. No breathalyzer had been administered. No blood test had been requested. These things were not in the file because they had not happened. Corley walked Solomon to the holding cell. Solomon stepped inside. The door locked. He sat on the metal bench along the wall. He placed his hands on his knees. He looked at the floor, then at the ceiling, then at the small reinforced window that offered a narrow rectangle of blue sky. He did not ask for a phone call. He did not ask for a lawyer. He did not make a sound. 2 other men were in the cell. One was asleep against the far wall. The other, a young man in his mid-20s with a split lip and paint-stained work boots, glanced at Solomon once and then looked away. An hour passed, then another. At some point, a correctional officer opened the door and asked if Solomon wanted to make a phone call. Solomon said no thank you. He said it pleasantly, as though he had been offered a cup of coffee he didn't particularly need. The officer stood in the doorway for a moment confused, then closed the door and walked away. Travis Culp left the station at noon. He stopped at a drive-thru, ate in his cruiser, and texted his union rep, a man named Jim Barrow, that the paperwork on the Sycamore stop was filed, and the old man would plead out. Jim Barrow texted back one word. Pete Dolan drove home after his shift. He sat at his kitchen table for a long time without eating the dinner he had made. He thought about the way Solomon had walked the line. 10 steps forward. Pivot, 10 steps back, the precision of it, the dignity of it. He thought about the word resisting, how it had been spoken before anything had happened that warranted it. He poured his dinner in the trash and went to bed. He did not sleep well. In the holding cell, Solomon Greer was building something, not a case in the legal sense. He did not know yet what specific charges Culp had chosen, though he could make very educated guesses. He was building an understanding of the room he was in. Every detail, every person he had seen, the hesitation in Pete Dolan's eyes before the cuffs went on, the way the desk sergeant had paused over the keyboard, the phone that Mrs. Dawes had held up on her porch. He was taking inventory. He had spent 30 years in rooms where men tried to lie under oath and make their lies sound like truth. He had learned to see the shape of a lie before it fully formed. He had learned that every lie had a seam, and if you pressed at the seam with exactly the right amount of pressure in exactly the right place, it came apart. He was very patient. He thought about Deshawn. Wednesday's chess game would have to wait. He would leave a note under the porch mat. He thought about the yellow tea roses. He thought about Marion, who had always told him that his greatest weapon was the simple fact that he looked like he had already forgiven you. He closed his eyes. He breathed slowly. He waited. Monday came with the particular grimness of courtroom mornings. The air conditioning in municipal courtroom 7B had been malfunctioning for 11 days. A maintenance request had been filed. It was sitting in a queue somewhere. The room smelled of burnt coffee, anxious perspiration, and the chemical ghost of a cleaning product that had not fully dried on the floor. The gallery was packed. It was always packed on Mondays. Traffic hearings, parking disputes, petty misdemeanors, the accumulated minor transgressions of a city that never fully stopped generating paperwork. Citizens sat in rows with the resigned patience of people in a waiting room at the Department of Motor Vehicles. Travis Culp sat in the front row. He had stretched his legs into the aisle. He was chewing gum. His dress uniform was pressed and sharp, the creases military precise. His badge caught the fluorescent light. His union rep, Jim Barrow, sat 3 rows behind him in a gray suit that had seen better years. Culp leaned toward his partner. Pete Dolan sat beside him holding a paper cup of coffee he had not yet drunk from. 5 minutes, Culp said. Maybe 10 if the old man gets dramatic. Public defender probably hasn't even read the file. Pete said nothing. He looked at the defense table. Solomon Greer sat there alone. He was wearing the orange jumpsuit. It still did not fit. His hands rested flat on the scarred wooden table. His head was slightly bowed. He looked to anyone passing by like a man who had already given up. But Pete had been watching those hands. They had not moved in 11 minutes. They were not the hands of a frightened man. They were the hands of a man who had found stillness the way some men find a weapon. Culp didn't notice. He was already planning the rest of his day. The bailiff bellowed, "All rise." The gallery shuffled to its feet. Judge Carolyn Marsh swept into the room like weather coming in off a cold lake. She was in her late 50s, angular with short silver hair, and the look of a woman who had been sitting in this chair long enough to have lost all patience for theater. She did not acknowledge the gallery. She did not acknowledge counsel. She sat down, arranged her papers, and slammed her gavel with a crack that cut through the murmur of the room like a cleaver. Docket 4492. State versus Solomon Greer. Charges resisting arrest, obstruction of justice, and public intoxication. She peered over her glasses at the prosecution table. Counselor Voss, ready. Ada. Pamela. Voss stood up. She was in her early 40s, ambitious in the way that people are ambitious when they have confused advancement with purpose. Her suit was expensive. Her briefcase was organized. She had not read more than the top sheet of the Greer file, because the top sheet was sufficient. Guilty plea. Reduced sentence. This was not a case. This was a formality. The state is ready, Your Honor. And the defense. Gary Fitch, the public defender, scrambled to his feet. He was a decent man, operating in conditions that made decency difficult. He had 4 other cases on this same docket and had reviewed the Greer file for approximately 12 minutes over his morning commute. Your Honor, the defense is prepared, but I should note that my client has declined to speak with me this morning, so... He trailed off. Judge Marsh looked at Solomon. Mr. Greer, is this true? Are you refusing to cooperate with your appointed counsel? The courtroom was doing what courtrooms do when something unexpected happens. It was paying attention. Solomon stood up. He did not scramble. He did not apologize. He rose the way a man rises who has stood in rooms like this before and knows exactly what standing means. He looked directly at Judge Marsh. "I am not refusing to cooperate with anyone, Your Honor," he said. His voice filled the room without effort, a deep, resonant instrument that seemed to come from somewhere lower than the chest. The voice of a man who had spent years being heard. "I am declining Mr. Fitch's representation." Culp made a sound from the gallery. Not quite a laugh. Not quite a word. The sound of a man who has already decided how this ends. Silence in the gallery, Marsh said without looking at him. She studied Solomon for a moment. "Mr. Greer, you are facing charges that carry a potential sentence of up to 4 years in state prison. You understand this." "I understand it fully, Your Honor. And you intend to represent yourself." "I do. I am the only person in this room equipped to handle the specific nature of this case." Marsh held his gaze. There was something in the way he had said that last sentence. Not arrogance, not desperation. The quiet confidence of a man who had just said a true thing. She was curious. She didn't want to be, but she was. "Very well," she said. "It is your right. Mr. Fitch, you are excused. Counselor Voss, call your first witness." Voss was already smiling. A pro se defendant was in her experience the easiest kind. They spoke too much. They asked the wrong questions. They made emotional arguments where they needed legal ones. They were gifts. The state calls Officer Travis Culp. Culp stood with the ease of a man walking onto familiar ground. He buttoned his jacket. He walked to the witness stand with his shoulders back and his chin up, and his gum tucked discreetly to one side. He placed his hand on the Bible. He took the oath with the practiced fluency of someone who had done it 43 times. He sat down. He adjusted his utility belt. The handcuffs rattled. He caught the eye of Jim Barrow in the gallery. Barrow gave the smallest nod. Voss approached. "Officer Culp, please describe for the court the events of the morning of the 28th. Culp cleared his throat. He had a voice designed for exactly this. Assured, measured, the voice of authority describing itself. "Yes, ma'am. I was on patrol in the West Side Division, specifically in the vicinity of Sycamore Road. At approximately 10:15 in the morning, I observed a vehicle parked at the curb. The registration sticker appeared irregular. I initiated contact with the registered owner, the defendant, Mr. Greer. And what occurred during that contact? The subject was immediately non-compliant. When I requested his license and registration, he became verbally confrontational. He refused to cooperate with a field sobriety evaluation, stating that I had no right to ask him to perform one. Based on my observations, specifically a strong odor of alcohol and unsteady gait, I determined that I had reasonable cause to conduct an evaluation. And when you attempted to conduct this evaluation, when I attempted to administer the test, the defendant became physically aggressive. He pushed my arm away when I reached for him. That constitutes the assault on an officer. He continued to resist during the subsequent attempt to place him under arrest." He said any of this out loud? Anything notable? Culp nodded slowly, a performance of reluctant memory. He said he knew people. Said I was making the worst mistake of my career. The usual kind of threats you hear from individuals who believe the law doesn't apply to them. Voss thanked him. She turned toward Solomon with an expression of polite dismissal. "Your witness, Mr. Greer." The courtroom adjusted itself. This was the part where things usually went sideways. The pro se defendant would stand up and make an impassioned speech about injustice, or cite maritime law, or weep, or accuse the judge of being part of the conspiracy. The bailiff would intervene. Marsh would hold it in contempt. The guilty plea would be negotiated by noon. Solomon stood. He did not pick up any papers. He did not consult any notes. He walked from behind the defense table with a slowness that was not uncertainty. It was deliberate, every step placed with care the way a chess player positions a piece. He stopped at the edge of the well and looked up at Travis Culp. "Officer Culp," he said. His voice was conversational, almost gentle. "You testified that I had an unsteady gait." "Yes. Could you describe what you observed specifically?" Culp blinked once. He had been asked this before. He had a rehearsed answer. "You were swaying slightly. Your balance was off." "I see." He nodded thoughtfully. "Officer, you entered this courtroom approximately 20 minutes ago. You walked from the back gallery to the witness stand. Which leg did you favor as you walked?" Culp's eyes went still. "I didn't favor either leg, Your Honor." Solomon said, turning to Marsh, "I am going to ask Officer Culp to stand up and walk to the end of the witness stand and back. I want to draw the court's attention to his gait." Voss stood. "Objection. Relevance. This is a grandstanding tactic. The relevance will be apparent immediately, Your Honor." Marsh looked at Culp. "Stand up, officer. Walk to the end of the stand and back." Culp stood, he walked. Solomon watched him. The gallery watched Solomon watching him. When Culp sat back down, Solomon spoke quietly. "Officer Culp, you favor your left leg. You have been favoring it since you sat down." Culp started to speak. "In your incident report," Solomon continued without raising his voice, "you stated that when I became physically aggressive, I pushed your right arm, causing you to stumble and strike your right knee against the vehicle door." "Yes, that's correct." "Your right knee?" Culp hesitated for 1/2 second. "Yes. So the knee you injured during our altercation was your right knee." "That's what I said. And yet you are favoring your left leg." Culp's jaw shifted. "I have an old injury on the left side. It acts up sometimes. Has nothing to do with the defendant." "Of course." Solomon let the silence sit for exactly the right amount of time. "Let us turn to your body camera," he said. "You were wearing one on the morning of the 28th. "Yes, and it was recording during our interaction. Unfortunately, the camera experienced a malfunction. The battery failed just before I initiated the stop." Just before Culp confirmed. Solomon tilted his head. "Officer, your incident report notes the time of initial contact as 10:17. Your body camera log, which is contained in the discovery documents provided by the prosecution, reflects that the camera went offline at 10:19, 2 minutes after you initiated contact." There was a pause. Culp's expression did not change, but something behind it did. "I may have the exact time wrong. It was around that window." Solomon said nothing for a moment. He simply looked at Culp the way a man looks at a thing he is in no hurry to pick up. "The camera went offline 2 minutes into our interaction. After you had already made contact. After you had already smelled what you believed to be alcohol. After you had already observed what you described as an unsteady gait." He let each item land separately, and yet no field sobriety test was completed. No breathalyzer was administered at the scene. No blood test was requested at the station. He turned to Judge Marsh. "Your Honor, the public intoxication charge is supported exclusively by Officer Culp's olfactory observation and his description of my gait. There is no chemical evidence of any kind." He turned back to Culp. "How was that evaluation never completed?" "The machine in my cruiser was out of service. Culp said, his voice finding its footing again. And the defendant was too combative at the station to be safely approached for a blood draw. Combative. Solomon repeated the word as though he had found it somewhere unexpected. You used that word in your report also. Combative. He paused. Officer Culp, are you familiar with the term Brady violation? Voss jumped to her feet. Objection. Relevance. The defendant is attempting to introduce legal concepts that have no bearing on this preliminary hearing. I understand what a Brady violation is, Solomon said, turning to face Voss with a calm so complete it was almost unsettling. A Brady violation is the suppression of evidence favorable to the defendant by law enforcement or the prosecution. It is a career-ending offense for any officer. Your Honor, I raise it because I believe material evidence was suppressed in this case. Marsh leaned forward. Overruled. Continue, Mr. Greer. He turned back to Culp. Officer, you testified under oath this morning that I resisted arrest, that I was physically aggressive, and that you had to use minimal force to subdue me. Yes. You understand that perjury is a felony. I'm telling the truth. Culp's voice had taken on a harder edge. The ease was gone. The performance was beginning to cost him something. You're a sad old man trying to talk his way out of a conviction, he said. Several people in the gallery shifted. Even Voss looked briefly uncomfortable. Marsh said nothing, but she wrote something down. Solomon did not react to the insult. He had been insulted by better men than Travis Culp. He had sat in chairs across from federal defendants who had tried every possible angle of intimidation. He simply waited for the room to settle. Then he walked to the defense table. He picked up a thumb drive. He held it up so that Judge Marsh could see it clearly. Your Honor, he said, I would like to submit Defense Exhibit A. Voss was on her feet before he finished the sentence. Objection. No disclosure and discovery. The defense is attempting to introduce evidence that has not been authenticated. For all we know, this is fabricated media. Solomon turned to Voss. This is a preliminary hearing, he said, and I will note that Officer Culp's body camera malfunctioned. The camera in my vehicle, however, did not. The room went very quiet. You have a dash camera, Marsh said. I do, Your Honor. It is a cloud upload system installed originally for a high-risk purpose. It uploads automatically to a remote server upon any sudden deceleration or door force event. Nothing that occurred that morning exists only on that drive. It exists on a server that this court may independently verify. Marsh looked at the thumb drive. She looked at Culp. Culp had gone the color of old chalk. She looked at Voss. Ms. Voss, your office's camera malfunctioned. I am inclined to see what Mr. Greer's camera saw. Bailiff set up the monitor. The next 3 minutes belonged to Travis Culp in the worst possible way. He sat in the witness chair and watched the bailiff wheel a flat-screen monitor to the center of the well. He watched a technician connect a laptop. He watched the cable be adjusted, the angle corrected, the volume checked. Every second was a stone dropped into still water. He was calculating. He was running through possibilities the way a man runs through exits in a room that is beginning to fill with smoke. Maybe the angle was bad. Maybe the audio was unclear. Maybe the timestamp was off. Maybe he could argue context. Maybe Barrow could make a call. Maybe something. He looked toward the gallery. Barrow's face told him nothing useful. The screen flickered to life. The footage was sharp. High-definition, wide-angle shot from the dash of Solomon's Buick looking forward and slightly to the right. The timestamp in the lower corner read October 28, 10:17 a.m. The street was quiet. A leaf moved across the sidewalk in slow motion. The morning light was clean. Then, in the rearview mirror, visible at the top of the frame, a police cruiser pulled up and angled in. The gallery had stopped murmuring. In the video, a door opened. Travis Culp appeared at the driver's side window. He was not walking the way a man walks when he's investigating a potential violation. He was walking the way a man walks when he has already made a decision. The digital version of Solomon Greer lowered his window. "Good morning, officer. How can I help you?" The digital Culp put his forearm on the roof of the car and leaned in close. "License and registration, old man." In the courtroom, Judge Marsh stopped writing. Her pen remained hovering over the page. On screen, Solomon's voice was patient and clear. "Certainly, officer. May I ask the reason for the stop?" "I'll ask the questions. Get me your documents." The video showed Solomon reaching deliberately into his wallet, producing his license, sliding it through the window. Culp snatched it. He turned to Pete Dolan at the rear of the car. "You smell that Dolan? Smells like bourbon." On screen, Pete Dolan said nothing. He was looking at the pavement. "I have not consumed any alcohol this morning," Solomon's voice said. "I am happy to perform a breathalyzer test here at the vehicle." "Nobody asked you what you're happy with. Get out of the car." "I do not consent to a search, officer. I am happy to cooperate with a lawful evaluation at this location." "I said get out." In the video, there was a pause. The kind of pause a man makes when he is deciding whether the person speaking to him is capable of reason. Then Culp grabbed the door handle. He ripped it open. Solomon was still buckled. He did not move. And then Travis Culp performed a move that was in its own way a kind of art, a dark, practiced art. He turned sideways, planted his right boot against the lower rim of the car door, and kicked hard, his own knee against his own boot against the metal rim. He stumbled. He screamed. He kicked me. Resisting. Stop resisting. He lunged forward into the car. The camera shook as the frame was disturbed. The audio caught what happened next in terrible clarity. "I'm going to make you regret this." The car engine cut off and the freeze frame held. Officer Travis Culp, fist raised, arm back. An elderly man buckled into his seat, still not having moved. The bailiff paused the video. The courtroom was silent. Not quiet in the way courtrooms get quiet when someone is reading something. Silent. The kind of silence that falls on a room when something real has entered it. Judge Carolyn Marsh stared at the freeze frame on the screen for a long time, then she turned her head very slowly toward the witness stand. If her expression had been a weather report, it would have read severe. "Officer Culp," she said. Her voice had gone very quiet. The quieter Marsh's voice went, the more dangerous it became. Experienced attorneys in the gallery understood this instinctively and leaned slightly back in their seats. "You are still under oath." Culp's mouth opened. "Your Honor, that angle as it looks worse than you kicked your own knee against that vehicle," Marsh said. "That is not what happened. I felt threatened. He was reaching for something. He was buckled into his seat," Marsh said. "The recording clearly shows. It was an instinct response. I was protecting myself." "You were performing an injury," Marsh said. The words landed like a gavel strike. Voss was writing something at the prosecution table. She was not looking at anyone. Culp looked at Barrow in the gallery. Barrow was looking at his own hands. Solomon had returned to the defense table during the video. He sat quietly. He had not said a word since the footage began. He had not celebrated. He had not pointed. He had not made a sound. He simply waited. Judge Marsh set down her pen. "The charges against Solomon Greer are dismissed," she said. "With prejudice. Mr. Greer, you are free to go." The gallery broke open. Applause scattered through the rows. A woman in the back said something that wasn't quite a word. Someone clapped with the particular force of a person who has been holding it in. Solomon raised one hand. The room quieted immediately. The speed of it surprised people. Even Marsh paused. "Thank you, Your Honor," Solomon said. His voice was composed and level. "But while I'm free to go, I am not yet finished." Culp looked at him. Solomon turned to face Ada Pamela Voss. "Ms. Voss, as an officer of the court, when you witness a felony committed in your presence and on the record, you carry a legal obligation to act. Officer Culp has just committed aggravated perjury, a Class A felony, in front of this judge, in front of this gallery, on camera." He paused. "Are you going to order his arrest? Or do I need to make a citizen's arrest myself?" The room went the kind of quiet where you can hear people deciding what to do with their faces. Culp laughed. It was not a confident laugh. It was the laugh of a man performing confidence he no longer had. "You can't be serious," he said. "You think they're going to arrest me? I'm the officer here." Solomon turned and looked at him directly for the first time since the footage ended. A cold, precise smile touched the corners of his mouth. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who has been patient for a very long time and has finally arrived at the place he has been walking toward. "You were the officer, Mr. Culp," he said. "Now you are a defendant." He reached into the breast pocket of the orange jumpsuit. He withdrew a pair of reading glasses, folded them open, and placed them on his face. The transformation was not dramatic. It was subtle, and it was complete. The slumped posture straightened. The bowed head lifted. The paint-stained, ill-fitting jumpsuit became irrelevant. He no longer looked like a grandfather. He looked like something considerably older and more serious than that. "Your Honor." Solomon addressed the bench. "I am invoking Section 14, Paragraph 9 of the Hargrove State Judicial Code. I am requesting an immediate bench warrant for Officer Travis Culp on charges of aggravated perjury, filing a false instrument, and assault under color of authority." Marsh stared at him. The way she cited the code, the structure of the request, the precision of the language. Something in the way he stood. She had a very good memory. She had been in law school 30 years ago. She had sat in a lecture hall at Georgetown. She had struggled with habeas corpus in a way that had left her permanently humbled about assumptions of easy mastery. She had sat 3 rows from the front, left side. Her professor had paced the front of the hall with his hands behind his back and talked about justice the way other men talked about mathematics, as something with rules that existed whether you acknowledged them or not. She had not seen that professor in almost 30 years. The man in front of her was older. The silver in his beard had not been there. The lines in his face were deeper. But the eyes, she had remembered those eyes. She said his name. First, as a question barely audible. Then, again louder, with the particular quality of a voice that has just understood something it cannot unhear. "Professor." She stood up. In 26 years on the bench, Judge Carolyn Marsh had never stood up during a proceeding. Oh my God. She looked past the orange jumpsuit, past the gray beard, past the years. "You're not Solomon Greer, the gardener." The name moved through the courtroom the way a stone moves through still water. Outward from the center. In circles. Solomon Greer. The Ironwood. Former professor of federal appellate procedure at Georgetown Law. Former law clerk to Justice Emmett Hollings of the Fourth Circuit. Former federal appellate judge. Author of the landmark ruling in Greer v. Hartley State in 2001. The decision that established mandatory evidentiary standards for police stops across 5 states. The ruling that law professors still taught as a foundational text in civil rights jurisprudence. The man who had disappeared into retirement 7 years ago after the death of his wife and had not been heard from in the legal community since. An attorney in the back row, who had clerked under Solomon's mentor, said the name to the colleague beside him. That colleague turned to the colleague beside her. The bailiff dropped his phone. Voss looked like she had stepped on something in the dark. Travis Culp sat in the witness stand and felt the particular sensation of a man who has just realized too late exactly how comprehensively he has miscalculated. He had known the plate was clean. He had known the man was no threat. He had chosen him precisely because quiet older black men driving worn cars in working-class neighborhoods did not, in his experience, have the resources or the connections to make a stop painful. He had chosen Solomon Greer because he thought Solomon Greer was invisible. He did not know. He could not have known. But that was the thing Solomon had said in a dozen opinions over 2 decades. That was the thing he had said in lecture halls and in briefs and in rulings that had outlasted the courtrooms where they were delivered. The law does not protect you more because of who you are. It protects you because you are. Culp understood now in the most visceral possible way what that sentence meant. "I didn't know," Culp said. His voice had lost all of its architecture. It was small and cracked, and entirely honest in a way it had not been for the entire morning. How was I supposed to know he didn't show me anything? He didn't tell me he was a judge, because I shouldn't have to. Solomon's voice filled the room, not loud, not performing, simply present. Citizenship is the only badge I require in this city, in this country. He looked at the gallery. He looked at the people sitting in the rows. People who had come in that morning to deal with parking tickets, who were now witnessing something else entirely. Officer Culp violated my rights because he believed I was powerless. He believed that because I drove an old car and wore work clothes and did not announce myself. He paused. How many other men are sitting in cells this morning who could not do what I just did today? How many quiet men went home last night without the means to pull out a thumb drive and show the truth of what happened to them? The room was very still. "Those men are the reason I came here today," Bailiff Marsh said. Her voice was not fully steady. "Take Officer Culp into custody. I am holding him in contempt of court. I am referring this full transcript and Exhibit A to the district attorney for immediate felony charges." Culp stood. He looked at Barrow. Barrow had his phone to his ear and was turned toward the wall. "You can't do this," Culp said. "I want my union rep. Call the chief." "This is—" "Get him out of my courtroom," Marsh said. The bailiff, who had worked this room for 12 years and who had his own opinions about Travis Culp that he had never been in a position to express, moved with unmistakable enthusiasm. The sound of the handcuffs, the ratcheting metal, the door opening. Culp was gone. The double doors at the back of the courtroom opened. A woman in her mid-30s walked in, moving through the gallery with the directness of someone who knows exactly where she is going. She was black, with the composed, careful bearing of someone who had spent years working in rooms where she was not expected, and had made a studied practice of being the best prepared person in any of them. She carried a file folder, dark blue, thick. She reached Solomon at the defense table and extended her hand. "Detective Nadia Okafor," she said quietly. "Internal Affairs." She set the folder on the table in front of him. "I've been building this for 7 months. I was waiting for someone who could stand at the front of it." Solomon looked at the folder. He looked at her. "How many?" he said. She opened it. 67 stops. Sycamore Road corridor. 18 months. 81% targeting black men over 50 driving vehicles valued under $8,000. He absorbed this. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said quietly, "Who else?" She turned to the next page. They sat in a conference room at the Federal Building on Bancroft Street, 3 floors up, with a view of the city that Solomon had not asked for, but appreciated anyway. The afternoon light was coming in at a low angle, stretching gold across the table between them. Okafor had laid everything out, not as a presentation, as a conversation between two people who were both fluent in the same language and did not need to pretend otherwise. Travis Culp was the visible end of something. He was not the beginning. The beginning, Okafor explained, was a management philosophy that had no official name and no official existence, but was understood completely by every officer assigned to the West Side Division under Lieutenant Warren Scheck. Numbers, not crime reduction numbers, not response time numbers, not community satisfaction numbers. Arrest numbers, impound numbers, stop numbers. Scheck ran his division the way a plant manager runs a quota-driven floor. You hit your numbers, you got good shift assignments, good performance reviews, promotions. You didn't hit your numbers. You got the bad shifts, the overnight weekends, the assignments that made a career long and miserable. Every officer in the division understood this. Most complied. Some complied enthusiastically. Travis Culp was the most enthusiastic of all. 14 stops a month consistently. The top producer. Next in line for sergeant. The stops were concentrated on Sycamore Road and the 3 streets adjacent to it. Not because the crime rate there was higher. It was not. It was because Scheck's informal targeting criteria shared in conversations rather than documents favored older black men driving unremarkable vehicles, because they were in his assessment the population least likely to lawyer up. The stops generated impounds. The impounds went to Redline Recovery, a towing company operating under a city contract. Redline Recovery's operations manager was a man named Gary Pendleton. Gary Pendleton was Warren Scheck's brother-in-law. Over 18 months, Redline Recovery had collected approximately $400,000 in impound and storage fees from vehicles seized in Culp's stops. Of that, a portion moved back through channels that Okafor had traced to an LLC registered in Delaware in Warren Scheck's wife's name. It was not complicated. It was just small enough to stay invisible. Until it wasn't. "How long have you known Solomon?" asked. 7 months since I had enough to understand the shape of it, she said. Longer than that since I suspected. What stopped you from moving? She paused. Every time I brought a complaint from a resident of Sycamore Road, it got reviewed by Scheck's office. He was my direct supervisor's supervisor. The complaints were dismissed at the review stage before they reached anyone with authority to act on them. 11 times. Solomon was quiet. She opened another tab in the folder. The 11th complaint was filed by a 72-year-old man named Albert Grimes. He drove a 2003 Dodge. He was stopped twice in 3 weeks. Both stops resulted in impounds. He lost his car. He had no way to get to dialysis. His daughter drove him for 4 months until his condition deteriorated and he was admitted to a care facility. She looked at Solomon. He never got his car back. The room was very quiet. Solomon looked at the page. He looked at the photograph Okafor had attached. Albert Grimes, 72 years old, thin, sitting on a porch with his hands on his knees. The posture was familiar. "What do you need?" Solomon said. "A complainant on the record whose credibility cannot be dismantled," she said. "Culp's pattern is documented. Scheck's financial connection to Redline is documented. But to move on, Scheck at his level, I need someone who can walk into federal court and not be torn apart on the stand. Someone who cannot be characterized as disgruntled, unreliable, or confused." Solomon nodded once. He closed the folder. "Then I am coming out of retirement," he said. She had hoped he would say that. She had not entirely expected it. "I want full access to the impound records," he said. "I want every complaint file, and I want Albert Grimes's case specifically. He should know that someone is going to explain to a federal court what happened to him." She slid him a separate document. She had thought to bring it. He looked at it. He allowed himself exactly one moment of something that might have been satisfaction. Then he put the folder under his arm and stood up. "There is one more thing," he said. "Pete Dolan, the rookie." She looked up. "He hesitated before he put those cuffs on," Solomon said. One full beat. He knew something was wrong. She nodded. "He has a chance to be something better than what he was shown," Solomon said. "Do not destroy him unless he refuses to tell the truth." She wrote something in her notes. He buttoned his cardigan. "I'm going home to tend my garden," he said. "Then, tomorrow morning, I would like to begin." She watched him walk to the door. She had spent 7 months building something that needed a foundation she could not supply herself. She looked at the files on the table. The foundation had just arrived in an orange jumpsuit. Warren Scheck had survived 17 years in the Hargrove Police Department by understanding one thing above all others. Never put it in writing. The quota expectations were communicated in a particular way. In shift briefings and casual hallway conversations, in the specific way he would review an officer's monthly report, pause at the stop count, and say nothing which said everything. His financial arrangement with Redline Recovery existed in a structure sufficiently removed from his direct name that any single document read alone proved nothing. He had been careful for 17 years. He was not careful enough. Because there is a kind of careful that accounts for everything except the possibility that someone has been watching you the entire time. Detective Nadia Okafor had been watching him for 7 months. And now, Solomon Greer had given her something Scheck had never factored into his calculations. A credible witness who understood the law better than Scheck's own attorney did. Solomon spent the next 10 days doing what he had always done when preparing for something important. He was thorough. He was quiet. He read everything. Every complaint file. Every incident report. Every impound record. Every financial document Okafor had assembled. He sat at the kitchen table in the house on Sycamore Road, the same table where Marion had done her crossword puzzles, and he built the picture piece by piece until he could see it whole. Deshawn came on Wednesday. He saw the files spread across the table and stood in the doorway of the kitchen. "Should I come back next week?" "Sit down," Solomon told him. "You can help." Deshawn sat. He looked at the documents. "This is real," he said. "This is very real. Are you going to be okay?" Solomon looked at him over the top of his reading glasses. "I have been in rooms considerably more dangerous than this," he said. "I was there voluntarily. I am here voluntarily." Both times the answer was the same. "What's the answer?" "You do the work." Deshawn looked at the files. "You know," he said, "when I grow up, I want to." He stopped. Solomon waited. "I want to be able to do what you're doing," Deshawn said. "Know enough to make it right." Solomon took off his glasses. "Then you go to law school," he said. "And you do not spend a single day in that building thinking about power. You spend every day thinking about the people who don't have any." Deshawn nodded slowly. "Can I help you with these files?" Solomon slid a stack across the table. "Start with the complaint records. Flag every case where the impound occurred within 15 minutes of the stop. That is our pattern evidence." Deshawn opened the first file. He read the name at the top. Albert Grimes. He looked up. "I know him. Mr. Albert lives on my block. He can't get around anymore." "I know," Solomon said. He put his glasses back on. They worked in silence for 2 hours. The afternoon moved through the kitchen window. The tea roses in the back garden leaned in the small wind. On the 11th day, Travis Culp agreed to cooperate. He had sat in a cell with no one returning his calls in the way that he had expected calls to be returned. Jim Barrow had issued a statement on behalf of the union noting that the union was, quote, gathering information before determining the scope of representation, which meant Barrow was watching to see which way the wind was blowing before he committed to anything. The wind was blowing very directly against Travis Culp. His attorney, a man named Dennis Folger, arrived on day 9 with the kind of face that lawyers wear when they are about to say something no one wants to hear. The dashcam footage is federal quality evidence, Folger said. The audio is clean. The image is clear. The timestamp corroborates every element of Mr. Greer's testimony. And Culp said, "So what do I do?" And Folger explained the arithmetic. Aggravated perjury alone carries 8 years. Assault under color of authority carries an additional 6. Civil rights violation under federal statute carries up to 10. That is 24 years. Plus, Culp was 47 years old and had spent 9 years as a police officer, which is not a qualification that improves your quality of life in state prison. Alternatively, Folger set a document on the table. You speak to Detective Okafor. You tell her everything. The quota expectations, the targeting criteria, the informal communications from Scheck about which streets and which profiles to focus on, the way the impound referrals worked, who signed what, where the money went, in exchange for a federal charge of filing a false instrument with a sentencing recommendation of 3 years and possible early release at 18 months in a facility that was not a state prison. Culp stared at the document. Scheck will know it was me. Scheck will be in a cell 12 feet away, Folger said. It won't matter. Culp picked up the pen. He held it for a long time. He thought about the morning on Sycamore Road. The quiet man in the cardigan with his canvas bag. The way the man had placed the bag on the hood of the car without being asked, hands visible, nothing hidden. He thought about the way the man had walked that line. 10 steps forward, pivot, 10 steps back. He had chosen that man because he looked like nothing. Because he seemed like the kind of man the system would swallow without noticing. He set the pen down. He picked it up again. He signed. What followed was swift in the way that things are swift when 7 months of careful preparation meet a moment of documented truth. Warren Scheck was arrested during the 8 o'clock shift briefing at the West Side Division. Okafor walked into the room with 2 federal agents. Scheck was at the front. He was reviewing the week's assignments. He saw them and understood immediately what the understanding was. He did not run. He did not argue. He stood very still while an agent read him his rights. The room, full of officers, did not move to stop it. Several of them looked at their hands. Several looked at the ceiling. One officer, a young woman who had filed an internal complaint about targeting criteria 8 months earlier, and been told to focus on her performance metrics, looked directly at Okafor, with an expression that was not quite relief, but was adjacent to it. Scheck was walked out in front of the division he had run for 9 years. Redline Recovery's city contract was suspended by the afternoon. The city's towing revenue records for the previous 3 years were subpoenaed. Gary Pendleton's LLC was frozen pending federal financial review. Pete Dolan went to Internal Affairs voluntarily. He did not call his union rep first. He walked in on his own and asked to give a statement. He sat across from a reviewing officer and told the truth. He described the morning on Sycamore Road. He described Culp's words before the stop. He described his own hesitation before applying the handcuffs. He described what he had seen on the dashcam footage and confirmed that it was accurate. He said he had known something was wrong. He said he had not done enough. He said he understood if that had consequences. The reviewing officer told him that his voluntary statement and cooperation had been noted. Pete was not charged. He was reassigned. He requested a transfer to the Community Policing Division. It was granted within the week. 3 other officers who had, under Scheck's informal direction, concentrated stops on Sycamore Road were suspended with pay pending review. 2 of them subsequently resigned. 1 fought the suspension. The police chief of Hargrove, a man named Douglas Hale, issued a statement through his office expressing full cooperation with the federal investigation. He had signed off on Culp's performance review 9 months earlier, calling him exemplary. That review was not mentioned in the statement. The city council scheduled a public hearing. It was 6 weeks after Solomon's arrest. 6 weeks since the morning on Sycamore Road. The council chambers held 200 people. By the time the hearing began, there were 340 people inside the building. 40 more stood in the hallway. A news crew had set up outside. There was a press pool inside the chambers. Councilwoman Rita Tanner had submitted the motion for the hearing the day after Solomon's courtroom appearance. She had called it a matter of immediate public concern. The motion had passed 7-2. The 2 dissenting votes had been quieter than usual since the dashcam footage aired. Solomon sat in the gallery. He had not been asked to testify first. He had specifically requested that he not go first. He wore a dark blue suit. It was the first time the people of Sycamore Road had seen him in anything other than a cardigan. Mrs. Paulette Dawes was in the row behind him. She had worn her church clothes. 4 women testified before Solomon. The first was named Doris Carmichael. She was 58. She had been stopped by Culp on a Sunday morning 3 blocks from her house. She had been on her way to pick up her mother from early church service. Her car had been impounded. She had filed a complaint. The complaint had been closed in 11 days. She had never received an explanation. The second was named Jean Holloway. She was 64. She had been stopped twice. Both times by Culp. Both times her vehicle had been impounded. She had paid over $1,800 in recovery fees. She had borrowed the money from her sister. The sister had not been entirely forgiving about it. The third was a man, not a woman. His name was Thomas Birch. He was 71. He had been stopped impounded and subsequently missed a medical appointment. He spoke quietly and with great precision about what it was like to be 71 years old and to have someone take your car. Not because of anything you had done, but because of what you looked like and what you drove. He said it had made him feel like the city did not think he counted. The fourth was the daughter of Albert Grimes. Her name was Carolyn. She was 43. She stood at the podium and she described her father. She did not describe his suffering dramatically. She described it factually. The dialysis schedule, the routes, the car, the stops, the impounds. The 4 months of driving him herself before he had to be admitted to a care facility. She looked at the 9 council members. "My father is 72 years old," she said. "He has never been arrested. He has never been charged with anything. He paid his taxes for 50 years. He drove his Dodge to dialysis 3 times a week." She paused. "He did not get his car back." She sat down. The chamber was very quiet. Councilwoman Tanner called Solomon. He walked to the podium. He placed one document in front of him. He did not tell his own story. He had decided that weeks ago. His story had been told in a courtroom. It was in the record. He picked up the document. "This is Officer Travis Culp's incident report from the morning of the 28th, he said. "I am going to read it." He read it. Every line, every fabricated detail. the odor of alcohol that had not existed, the unsteady gait on the flat sidewalk, the resistance that had not occurred, the physical aggression that had been staged against a car door. He read it in his judicial voice, without commentary, without outrage, without editorializing. He set it down. He pressed a small button on the laptop that a technician had set up at the podium. 30 seconds of audio played. Let's give Grandpa a lesson he won't forget. He let the silence afterward be exactly as long as it needed to be. Then he looked at the council. 9 of you are sitting in that row, he said. You have the power to change 3 things today. Whether Travis Culp remains employed, whether Warren Scheck's conduct constitutes policy or aberration, and whether what happened to Doris Carmichael Jean Holloway, Thomas Birch, Albert Grimes, and 12 other residents of this city happens again. He looked at the 2 council members who had voted against the hearing. I am not asking you to feel anything about me. I am asking you to understand what you are voting on. He returned to his seat. Tanner called the vote. Officer Culp's employment terminated. 7 in favor, 2 against. Scheck referred for federal prosecution. 9 in favor, unanimous. Mandatory body camera activation policy adopted. Body camera footage to be made publicly available within 72 hours of any use of force incident. 9 in favor. Civilian Oversight Board established with independent subpoena authority. 8 in favor, 1 against. Red Line recovery contract canceled permanently. 9 in favor. The gavel fell. Solomon sat in the gallery. He did not stand. He did not join the applause that broke through the chamber. He was looking at a photograph he had brought in the inside pocket of his jacket. It was Marion. She was standing in the garden. Her hands were in work gloves. She was laughing at something he had said. He had said, "Who is the one who knows where all my law books are?" She had laughed. "I am the only one who knows where anything in this house is. Don't you forget it." He folded the photograph. He put it back in his pocket. He stood up. Mrs. Dawes was behind him. She put her hand briefly on his arm. She did not say anything. Neither did he. He walked out of the chambers and down the steps of City Hall into the evening air. It smelled like rain coming. Travis Culp was convicted in federal court on charges of aggravated perjury, filing a false instrument, and civil rights violation under color of authority. He was sentenced to 18 years. The judge who sentenced him was a black woman named Judge Patricia Osei, who had spent 11 years as a public defender before being appointed to the federal bench. She had spent those 11 years watching cases like Solomon's go the other way. She sentenced Culp without drama. She read the sentencing guidelines. She applied them. She did not look at him as she read the sentence. She looked at the gallery. Warren Scheck pleaded guilty to conspiracy and misuse of public funds 11 months after his arrest. He had spent those 11 months watching his financial structure disassemble itself piece by piece under federal examination. The LLC, the towing arrangement, the shift assignment records, Culp's testimony, Okafor's 7 months of documentation. He received 11 years. His pension was revoked. Pamela Voss resigned from the district attorney's office before charges were formally filed against her. 6 months after her resignation, the state bar suspended her license for 18 months on grounds of prosecutorial misconduct. She did not contest the suspension. Gary Pendleton and Red Line Recovery faced a civil suit brought jointly by 23 residents of Hargrove's West Side whose vehicles had been seized under the arrangement. The suit was settled for an amount that the court sealed at Pendleton's request. The attorneys for the residents declined to contest the sealing. Their clients had been made whole. That was what mattered. Chief Douglas Hale retired 14 months after the hearing. He released a statement citing a desire to, quote, spend more time with his family. The statement was 4 sentences long. The Hargrove City Council adopted what became known informally as the Greer Standard, a set of mandatory procedural requirements for police stops that included body camera activation before any vehicle or pedestrian contact documentation of specific stated probable cause before any impound could be initiated, and a civilian review mechanism for any complaint that resulted in dismissal within 30 days. It was not perfect. Solomon had said that at the press conference someone had organized outside City Hall the morning the Greer Standard was formally adopted. A reporter had asked him if he was satisfied. He had taken a moment before answering. A law on paper and justice on the street are 2 different things, he said. This law is a beginning. What happens next depends entirely on whether the people who enforce it believe in it, and on whether the people it is designed to protect insist on it. "Are you going back to the bench?" the reporter asked. He looked at her. "No," he said. He put on his hat. "My time on the bench is finished. I served my purpose there. I reminded a room full of lawyers what the law was supposed to do." He looked at the street. "I can do the same thing from Sycamore Road." Albert Grimes did not get his car back. His Dodge had been auctioned. The proceeds had gone into Redline Recovery's accounts, which were now frozen. What he did get through the civil settlement was enough to purchase a newer vehicle, a 2014 Kia that his daughter had helped him select. It had a comfortable seat and a radio with large buttons. He drove it to dialysis for the first time on a Wednesday morning in late spring. His daughter sat in the passenger seat. He parked in the dialysis center's lot. He turned off the engine. He sat for a moment. He was 72 years old. He had paid his taxes for 50 years. He had driven his car to dialysis 3 times a week without incident until a man with a quota and an arrangement with a towing company had decided he was worth more as an impound than as a citizen. He was not entirely without bitterness, but he started the car on his own, and he drove there himself, and that was something. It was 6 months after the council hearing when Deshawn knocked on the door of the house on Sycamore Road on a Wednesday morning and found Solomon in the garden. Not playing chess, actually in the garden. On his knees, in the soil beside the yellow tea roses along the back fence, wearing the garden gloves with the worn-through fingertips, doing what needed doing. Solomon heard the gate and looked up. Deshawn was holding an envelope. His face was attempting to be neutral. It was not entirely succeeding. "What is that?" Solomon said. Deshawn crossed the garden and held the envelope out. "It says Howard University on it," Deshawn said. "And it came certified mail, so I had to sign for it. And it's pretty thick." Solomon straightened up. His knees reminded him they were 64 years old, and he acknowledged the reminder. He took the envelope. He looked at it for a moment. Then he handed it back. "Open it," he said. Deshawn looked at him. "Are you sure?" "You did the work," Solomon said. "Open it." Deshawn opened it. He read. His face did the thing that faces do when a door opens that you have been standing in front of for a long time. He said something that was not quite a sentence. Solomon waited. "Did you get in?" Deshawn looked up. "Full scholarship," he said, "pre-law." Solomon pulled off one garden glove. He extended his hand. Deshawn shook it. Then Deshawn said something else, something quieter. "I wouldn't have applied if I hadn't watched what you did in that courtroom." Solomon kept his expression level, but something behind it was not. "You watched a man do what he was trained to do," he said. "That training will be yours in 4 years. Use it better than I did. You didn't do anything wrong." "I did not do anything wrong on Sycamore Road," Solomon agreed. He looked at the roses. But I spent 7 years in this garden when I could have been doing something that mattered. Marion would have told me that herself, given enough time. He pulled the other glove back on. Now, when you get to Howard, the first class you will take is constitutional law. Your professor will be a woman named Bridget Cole. She is possibly the finest living constitutional scholar in the country. She is also the most demanding person you will ever sit across from in an academic setting. Deshawn nodded. She was my student, Solomon said. Class of 1998. Third row, left side. He looked at Deshawn. Sit in the front. Do not coast on anything. She will know within the first week exactly how serious you are, and she will treat you accordingly from that moment forward. Deshawn was quiet for a moment. What do I tell her when she asks who I know? Tell her you played chess with me on Wednesday afternoons. She'll understand. He went back to the roses. Deshawn stood in the garden for a moment, the acceptance letter in his hand. Then he sat down on the garden bench and watched Solomon work. The afternoon was the particular kind of quiet that a city sometimes achieves when the wind is right and the traffic is low, and the light has decided to be kind. A patrol car came slowly down Sycamore Road and turned the corner at 4th. New officers. Young. The driver waved at Mrs. Dawes on her porch. She raised her hand. Not in protest, not in suspicion. Just a wave. The car kept going. In the maximum security wing of Hargrove Correctional Institution inmate 742, formerly Officer Travis Culp sat on the edge of his bunk. It was 4 in the afternoon. He had 20 hours until he could go to the recreation room. It was the same time it had been yesterday at 4 in the afternoon, and the day before. The walls were a particular shade of institutional gray that he had stared at long enough to know every variance in the paint. He had been an officer for 9 years. He had stopped people. He had searched them. He had taken their cars. He had written reports that described events that had not happened in the language of events that had. He had done all of this because the structure around him had made it easy, made it rewarded, made it feel like simply doing the job. He understood now what he had not then, that the structure was not the law, that a system that rewards the wrong thing is still wrong, that a man who follows instructions that are wrong is still responsible for the wrongness. He had spent 9 years enforcing things. Now things were enforced upon him. He thought about Solomon Greer sometimes, not with anger anymore. Anger had been the first thing he felt. Then something else complicated and uncomfortable that he did not have a word for. He thought about the walk the old man had performed on that sidewalk. The steadiness of it, the dignity of it. He thought about his own hands. 18 months before they had cuffed a man who had done nothing. He had a long time to think about that. Years. He had nothing else to do. Nadia Okafor was promoted to captain of the Hargrove Police Department's newly formed accountability unit. The unit had a staff of 7. They had subpoena authority. They reported to a civilian board rather than to the departmental chain of command. It was not the unit she would have designed from scratch. There were things she would have done differently. But it existed. 7 months ago it had not existed. She had made a contribution to its existence. That was what doing the work looked like. She sat at her desk on the first morning in her new office and looked at the stack of files on the corner of the desk. New complaints. 14 of them. 14 people who had taken the step of writing down what had happened to them because they now believed that someone would read it. She opened the first one. She started. There was one more thing that Solomon did on a Saturday morning before he became the quiet man on Sycamore Road again. He drove to a care facility on the north side of Hargrove. He carried a small paper bag with a crossword puzzle book and a container of his neighbor's homemade peach preserves, which was the closest thing to a cultural artifact of excellence that existed in Solomon's immediate vicinity. He went to the second floor. He knocked on an open door. Albert Grimes was in a chair by the window. He was looking out at the parking lot. He turned when Solomon knocked. He did not know who Solomon was. He had heard the name, but the face meant nothing. Solomon introduced himself. The old man's eyes did not light up with recognition. Solomon was glad. He sat down in the chair across from him. He said, "I understand you drove a 2003 Dodge." Albert Grimes said they took it. "I know," Solomon said. He opened the peach preserves and set them on the table between them. "I wanted to come and tell you personally that what happened to your car was wrong. Not because of who I am or what I know, but because it was wrong." Albert Grimes looked at him for a long moment. A care worker came in with afternoon medications. She set them on the tray. She looked briefly at Solomon with the professional curiosity of someone noting an unfamiliar visitor. She left. Albert Grimes picked up the cup of water from his tray. He took his medications. He set the cup down. He looked at Solomon. "You're the one from the news." "Yes." "The judge man. I was a judge once. Now I live on Sycamore Road." Albert Grimes looked out the window. "I know Sycamore Road," he said. "I had a friend on Sycamore Road." "We might have known each other," Solomon said. "Maybe." The two men sat for a while. The afternoon was quiet. Outside, a woman was walking through the parking lot with a casserole dish and looking for the entrance. A bird was working at something in the ornamental planting near the door. "What are you going to do with your new car?" Solomon said. Albert Grimes looked at him. Something like a smile. "Drive it," the old man said. "What do you think?" Solomon nodded. He picked up the crossword puzzle book. He set it on the table between them. "Can you do these?" Albert Grimes looked at it. "I'm not bad." Solomon produced a pen. "Then we have an hour." They sat together in the afternoon light of a care facility on the north side of Hargrove. Two old men. One pen. One crossword. Neither of them solved it all the way through. They got close. As Solomon was leaving, Albert Grimes said from the chair by the window one sentence. "Thank you for coming." Solomon paused in the doorway. "Thank you for fighting a parking ticket 40 years ago in a city where the system wanted you to pay it without asking questions." Albert Grimes made a small sound that might have been confusion. "I never fought a parking ticket." "I know," Solomon said, "but you filed a complaint." "And that complaint was dismissed, and it went into a file, and that file sat in a drawer for 8 months. And a detective named Nadia Okafor read it, and it was one of 11, and 11 became the number that mattered." He put his hat on. "You did not fight alone. You were never fighting alone, you just didn't know it at the time." He walked out. He drove the old Buick back down Sycamore Road, past Mrs. Dawes's house, past the hardware store, past the corner where a cruiser had once sat for 11 minutes deciding who to stop. He parked in front of his house. He got out of the car. He checked the registration sticker out of habit. Current. He went inside. He put the kettle on. He stood in the kitchen and waited for it to boil. He thought about Marion, about what she would have said if he had called her from that holding cell. She would have been quiet for a long moment. And then she would have said, "I hope you remember where you put the rooting powder because I am not going to the hardware store for you." He laughed. A small private sound in an empty kitchen. The kettle boiled. He made his tea. He took it to the front porch and sat in his chair. The afternoon was doing what afternoons in Hargrove did in the spring, settling into something golden and unhurried. Down the block, 2 children were on a bicycle. One pedaling, one holding on. A man walked a dog with the focused determination of someone who has agreed to walk this dog every day and has come to terms with it. A woman sat on her own porch one house down, reading something, occasionally looking up at the street. Sycamore Road. It looked exactly the same as it had on the morning of the 28th, when Solomon had walked 2 blocks to the hardware store with a canvas bag and a thought about rooting powder. It was not exactly the same. The complaints were being read now. The stops were being documented in a way that required documentation. The next Travis Culp would not find Sycamore Road so convenient. That did not mean there would be no next Travis Culp. Solomon did not believe that problems solved themselves permanently. He had spent 30 years in rooms full of lawyers, and he knew that injustice was patient and practical and would find new shapes as fast as old ones were closed off. But it was harder now than it had been a year ago, and in a year it might be harder still. That was how the work worked. He sat on the porch with his tea. In a while, Wednesday would come. Deshawn would show up with his chessboard and his arguments and his bright, restless mind. He would ask Solomon something impossible, and Solomon would answer it badly, and Deshawn would argue with the answer for 20 minutes and eventually arrive at something better. That was how teaching worked. The tea was good. The afternoon was good. The yellow roses along the porch rail were doing better. The stems had straightened. The blooms were opening. A patrol car came down Sycamore Road. New officers slow roll windows down. The driver saw Mrs. Dawes on her porch and raised a hand. She raised hers back. Solomon watched. He picked up his cup. There is a kind of victory that does not look like what movies tell you victory looks like. It does not involve crowds or speeches or music rising to a crescendo. It looks like an old man on a porch with a cup of tea. It looks like a patrol car moving down a street at the right speed without stopping anyone who does not need to be stopped. It looks like a 17-year-old with a letter from Howard University folded in his pocket. It looks like a 72-year-old man driving to dialysis in a car that is his again. It looks like the scales moving. Not all the way. Never all the way in a single morning. But moving. Solomon set his cup down. He looked at the street for a while longer. Then he went back inside to tend to the things that needed tending. If you believe that dignity is not something that can be stripped from a person by a uniform subscribed to our channel, the stories we tell are about the people who reminded us why that matters. There were things Solomon had not expected when he walked out of Municipal Courtroom 7B that day. He had expected the paperwork. He had expected the legal machinery to begin turning. He had not expected the letters. They started arriving 3 days after the courtroom footage circulated online. Someone had recorded the audio from a phone in the gallery. Not the dashcam footage, which was still in evidence, but the sound of Solomon's voice in that room. The part where he said, "How many quiet men are sitting in cells this morning who could not do what I just did today?" That 11-second clip circulated widely. He did not follow it. Mrs. Dawes told him about it. The letters came anyway. To the house on Sycamore Road because his address was in the public record from the arrest. Most of them were brief. A few lines. "Thank you. My father had this happen. My brother. My husband. A man in my congregation. A man on my street." Some of them included photographs. Older men. Most of them in their work clothes. Most of them with the look of people who had spent a long time being told that what happened to them was their fault. Solomon read every letter. He did not respond to all of them, but he read them. He put them in a file. He gave the file to Nadia Okafor. Some of those letters became the basis for complaints that the accountability unit could investigate. Some of those complaints led to records being examined. Some of those records revealed patterns, not on Sycamore Road, in other cities, other divisions, other names. but the shape was familiar. Solomon understood in reading those letters what he had only partially understood in 30 years on the bench. The law books in his hall closet described a system. The letters described the gap between the system and the experience of the people the system was supposed to serve. He had spent his career building bridges across that gap from the legal side. He had not understood from the judicial side how wide the gap looked from where the letters were coming from. He was 64 years old and still learning things. Marion would have found that funny, in a kind way. He sat at the kitchen table on a Sunday evening with the letters spread out in front of him, and thought about the man who had put him in that holding cell. Not with anger. He had decided in that cell in those first few still hours that he would not carry anger out of it. Anger was weight he did not need. What he would carry was clarity. The clarity that a thing that happened to him happened to other people every day. People who were not him. People who did not have a law degree and a 20-year federal record and a dash cam uploaded to an off-site server. People who had nothing except the fact that they were right. And being right in the absence of documentation and credential and institutional standing was frequently insufficient. That was the thing he had spent 30 years adjudicating from a distance. And that was the thing he had experienced from the inside on a Tuesday morning in October. He thought it was important that he had experienced it. He thought it was important that he had not been protected from it by any accidental announcement of who he was. He had been an old man in a cardigan with a canvas bag. He had been stopped because he fit a profile. He had been cuffed because the man who stopped him expected compliance and obedience, and the particular silence of someone who has no recourse. And the only thing that had been different about his situation was that he had recourse. He had been trained in the language that the system spoke. He had practiced in the rooms where the system made its decisions. He had spent decades as one of the people who determined what the system's words meant. That was not justice. That was luck dressed up as preparation. He wrote that down. In the journal he had started keeping since Marion died. He had never been a journal keeper. She had been the one who wrote things down. Now he wrote it down. The man next to me in that cell went home without recourse. This is the difference between justice and luck. My job now is to shrink that difference. He closed the journal. He looked at the letters. He thought about the community center 3 blocks over. He had been on its board for 2 years, mostly as a name on a letterhead. He thought about what it would mean to actually show up. Not as a name, as a person who came on Tuesdays and Thursdays and taught young men and women to read the language that the system spoke. Not law school, not the bar exam, simpler than that. How to file a complaint and make it stick. How to document a stop. What rights you have when a cruiser pulls up. What a recording device on your dashboard means. What the word probable cause actually means, and how to invoke it without escalating. How to fight a parking ticket in a city where the system wants you to pay it without asking questions. Small things. Precise things. Things that mattered. He thought about Albert Grimes. He thought about Doris Carmichael and Jean Holloway and Thomas Birch. He thought about the woman in the care facility parking lot with the casserole dish. Ordinary people doing ordinary things. Not asking to be protected. Just asking not to be targeted. He put the letters back in the file. He went to bed. In the morning, he called the director of the Sycamore Road Community Center. A woman named Patricia Banks answered on the second ring. She had been expecting his call. She had not told him she was expecting it. But she had been. "I would like to come in," he said, "on a regular basis. Not as a figure, as someone who can teach." She said, "We have been waiting for you." He said, "I'm sorry it took me so long." There was a brief pause. "You came back," she said. "That is what matters." He hung up. He put the kettle on. He thought about the reading glasses. The moment he had unfolded them in the courtroom and the room had shifted. He had been folded inside that orange jumpsuit for 3 days. Quiet, still, waiting. And the entire time the room around him had seen one thing. He had not corrected them. He had not asked to be seen differently. He had simply waited for the moment when he could show them plainly and without theater what had been there the whole time. That was the lesson. Not that credentials matter. They do, but that was not the lesson. The lesson was that what he carried into that courtroom, the 30 years of preparation, the knowledge, the patience, the reading glasses was available. It had always been available. He had, simply for 7 quiet years in this garden, put it away. He was not going to put it away again. The yellow tea roses bloomed along the back fence. They had been struggling. The rooting powder had helped. He stood at the kitchen window with his tea and looked at them. Marion. He thought her name like breathing, not grief anymore, something that had become part of how he occupied a room. She would have had something precise to say about all of this. She always did. He decided she would have said that it was about time. He smiled. He drank his tea. He went out to the garden.